Hello there, and welcome to another edition of Hashtag Now Smoking. I'm your host, Gary Korb, Executive Editor for CigarAdvisor.com. And today, I'm going to be smoking the Sobremesa Brûlée Robusto from Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. And if he isn't the smartest person in the room, you can bet he's the second smartest person in the room. Steve Saka is joining me today. He's the founder of Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. And Steve, welcome to the program. And I'm glad you could join me today.
Only one person in my room, so I'm certain I'm the smartest in this room.
Well, that's what I meant, there you are. So anyway, the Sobremesa Brûlée, this is the Robusto. We're going to get into the sizes and stuff, but let me give you just a quick rundown of the blend. The size is a 5.5 by 52. I like these dimensions a lot. It is, I guess, considered mellow. The wrapper is in Ecuador, Connecticut. The binder is Mexican. I think it's a Matacapan, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And the filler is Nicaraguan Condega Esteli and Pueblo Nuevo. And this cigar has a retail price, suggested retail price, of about $12.45. Sounds like a lot, but let me tell you, you're going to smoke this cigar and you'll see it is very well worth the price. So,
you know what I find rather insulting about that comment? And I hear it all the time, so it's not like you're insulting. Why is it okay that Davidoff makes Connecticut shade cigars and they cost $20? You know what I mean? Or why is a Diamond Crown a $15 to $17 cigar? How is it that, a small maker, why are their cigars supposed to be cheaper when in reality it actually costs them more to make cigars than Davidoff or J.C. Newman? And I'm not faulting them in any way whatsoever. They're going to charge the prices that they feel is a fair market value.
Right.
But it's a comment that I've never really understood. Now, if you're going to say it's expensive, can you get a Connecticut shade cigar for $8? Yeah, you can get a Connecticut shade cigar for $8. You can get a Connecticut shade cigar for $1.25. There's a ton out there in bundles. I mean, they smoke like crap, but you're welcome to it. But I don't know why. I find it a weird, and I know you're like, I'm just trying to start this, man. I'm not trying to start a civil war here. That's what you're thinking in your head. Like, what did I do? I already set this guy up. But it's just kind of one of these casual comments that I always wonder about because, when I look at a Brûlée, I don't see anything quality-wise, tobacco-wise, that makes it a lesser cigar than, Davidoff or Diamond Crown or, an Ashton Cabinet Select. I don't even know if those are Connecticut. I don't remember. It's been a long time. But it's one of those weird things. Go on. Sorry.
I hope you're not inferring what I didn't imply because I did want to get into
it just made me think about it because, you often hear that when it talks of, because my cigars across the board cost a little bit more.
That's true. We're going to talk about that.
Right. And I embrace that as a conversation. It doesn't bother me. And look, they cost a little bit more. But I think that for the quality that they are, I think the price is a good value. I don't think that you can do a one-to-one, apple-to-apple that, because this cigar costs X, then all cigars should cost Y. I think it really is very dependent on the product and the quality and whatnot. So, and it's one of the things that, I just... like I said, it's one of those weird things that, it's often said. And I don't know if the consumer, when they say, I know when you say it, you don't mean anything by it. I don't even think the consumer means anything by it. I think it's just one of those casual things that's said. But it does have a little bit of an inference that, this costs too much. And that's like saying, well, does a Ferrari cost too much? Are Bose headphones worth the extra premium, not worth the extra premium? Is a single malt Scotch better than a blended whiskey? I mean, they both get you equally drunk. I mean, I like both of them at the end of the day. You know what I mean? But I don't look at them as being the same, even though both they're whiskeys, they're distillations, right? Made out of all the same relative ingredients for all practical purposes. But why does a bottle of Lagavulin cost $98, and why does a bottle of Jack Daniels cost $26? You know what I mean?
Well, I'm hoping that you can get into that with me later, because it's actually one of the questions I had on tap here for you, because you, a few years ago, you and I were at it was an event you were doing here at Famous, and we were talking about, what qualifies or quantifies, whatever, the prices that you charge or whatever other people charge, but you in particular. So I want to get into that a little bit later. But I mention the price, and a lot of people will say, with $12.45, they might go, ooh, But that's why we do this show, and that's why I want people to be aware of these cigars. And let's get back to our Sobremesa here, a Brûlée. It's got a beautiful Ecuador, Connecticut wrapper, and it is really, really nice. It's well packed, as it should be. And I know, Steve, you're a stickler for quality and, quality control. And now, are these rolled entubado or in the?
No, they're rolled. They're using my technique. It's kind of a lazy entubado, a loose entubado. It's a technique that we kind of started employing when I was at Drew Estate, when we were manufacturing Liga Privadas, and it's the same technique with a couple little tweaks. Over the years, I've found a few little improvements, in my opinion, to it. So it's kind of it's a bit more of a wider tubing of the tobacco than a traditional N2 bar.
Okay. Well, it draws really well. I am getting that nice sweetness out of it, on the pre-light.
I mean, by bunching it the way we bunch it, it allows us to get the cigars to be denser and heavier, more packed, but yet still allows for the draw to occur. And for me, I like my cigars to be firm to the touch. And it's not because I care that they're firm to the touch. What I care about is that they be packed to a certain density level, because that ultimately will result in a cooler, more even burn. And when you get a cooler, more even burn, it will end up not only being more pleasurable to smoke, but it'll translate the recipe of the Liga better to the smoker and leaves less to chance on the combustion. It kind of cuts out some of the coning, it cuts out some of the tunneling, it cuts out some of the canoeing, and actually the cigar will. Most of my cigars, Brûlée included, they'll typically smoke about 20% longer than a cigar of similar size by most manufacturers. So you'll actually get more smoking time. And look, the best thing to do is just to take 3 or 4 of your favorite brands in a similar size. This is 5 1/4 by 52 Robusto, and smoke those and just time yourself and see how long it takes. I think you're going to find almost universally my cigars take longer, with the exception of one brand, Sin Compromiso. I'm not able to pack those quite as dense as I normally would because of the press. The press shape ends up interfering. You run into problems with potentially making them a little tight. So my Sobremesa, even my press cigars are firmer than most people's press cigars, but the difference isn't as dramatic in Sin Compromiso, I think, as it is in my standard round Parellos across the board. Because if you just put them on
that's really, really interesting. I never even thought of that. But I'll tell you one thing, that this is definitely a cigar, and I think you mentioned this in one of the press releases when this came out. It's about a year old, right? It came out last year.
Yeah, it came out last year's trade show, so that would have been what?
Yeah, late June, early July.
And then it started shipping end of July, early August.
And you mentioned here that you said, you say here, this is a relaxing smoking experience meant to be savored slowly. And I've been a big proponent of just taking your time when you have a good cigar. Oh, I had one the other day. It's kind of my warm-up cigar for this. I took some pictures and things, and I purposely just let this thing smoke itself. And it is so much better, especially with this particular blend, when you just let it do its thing and just take that puff every 1 or 2 minutes even.
Yeah. Well,
And
here's the thing, Gary. When I wrote that, it was more about, I was thinking about people that smoke my cigar smoking it. So look,
okay.
I'm known for making heavier, fuller, robust blends. So most of the people that smoke my products prefer that end of the spectrum. And Brûlée being a milder cigar, I wanted them to just kind of slow down a little bit, because a lot of times when you smoke a cigar that's too mild for yourself, you will end up over smoking it because you're trying to force it to give you more body and more oomph than what it's capable of doing. So for the typical shade smoker, I don't think that's relevant. You just smoke it. It was more me just kind of, I guess, virtue signaling to the guys that would normally smoke, my Mi Queridas and Todos Las Dias and Umbagogs, that, they're not going to be able to get this cigar to deliver the punch or the zip that they're used to. This is a milder shade cigar. That's what it is. So I just didn't want them to over smoke, because a lot of times when you over smoke a cigar, it ends up becoming acrid and bitter on you. And you just assume that the blend is acrid and bitter. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it is the fault of the blend in the cigar. But sometimes when you're smoking milder and you're normally a stronger guy, you just subconsciously just smoke it faster, because you're trying to give you something that isn't there. And you just feel like, if I keep pulling, and you don't do it consciously, but you do it subconsciously. And one of the things I always tell consumers is, when you get a cigar and it is burning kind of bitter to you, take a nice big long pull off it, and then take your thumb and your forefinger and place them right behind the burn line, and see how that feels. It should be hot, okay? It could even be uncomfortable, but you should be able to hold it indefinitely. If you can't hold it indefinitely, then that's an indication that potentially sort of a problem in the bunch, that you're maybe over smoking it too quickly. So it's a very quick way for you to check if you're the reason why the cigar is burning bitter and acrid and thin. And so.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. Yeah, I think a lot of people get a lot out of that too. And I've even told other people about that, because I think it was last year or so, when we had our live show, you came on and I think you demonstrated that. It's great. But I find like just the opposite. Like if it's really flavorful, I tend to hit on it more, because I just want to keep getting that flavor. So with me, it's not so that it's mild. It's just that it's just so tasty, But I found that with this one, you really have to just, and I think it's made, all cigars, I suppose, are made for just relaxing. But this one in particular is just, you were saying that you said it reminded you of the milder shade wrap ligas of your early years.
Yeah, because I'm like everybody. I mean, we all begin somewhere. And when I started smoking cigars in the 80s, and even going through into the early 90s, I smoked a lot of Connecticut shade cigars. They were a big part of what I smoked. And I don't know why, over the years, I kind of got away from them. They just didn't have the oomph. They didn't have the body that I liked. And then, when I started Dunbarton, and, you're making different cigars and different genres for different people. And the one thing I didn't have is I didn't have a mild Connecticut style cigar. And so I ended up basically buying a lot of the most popular ones in the marketplace and just smoking to just see, okay, where are these cigars today? What do they taste like? I hadn't smoked a Davidoff Double R in years. I hadn't smoked a Macanudo in years. I hadn't smoked a regular Romeo and Julieta Churchill shade in years. And what I was kind of surprised by was I found so many of them just thin and wispy, and they were mild, but they really weren't mild, because oddly enough, in their thinness and in their wispiness, they were also very bitter, and there was like a real acrid back note to it. And I was kind of like, is that me, smoking this cigar 25 years into the future? Is my memory skewed? Are the cigars different? I mean, because look, your tastes change over the years. And none of the cigars I was smoking, with the exception of just a couple, really
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of what I loved about Connecticut shade cigars back in the day. And that's kind of where it kind of set me off. You know how everybody today is making not your grandfather's Connecticut? That's like the tagline.
Yeah, I
And
know.
I'm not throwing shade on these manufacturers, but I'm going to throw shade. I think it's stupid. I don't understand it. It makes no sense to me because the consumers that want to smoke Connecticut shade, they want a milder smoking experience. That's what they're
Mm-hmm.
seeking. And the consumers that want a strong cigar experience, they rarely smoke shade cigars. So when you make the not your grandfather's Connecticut, I don't really understand who the customer is for that cigar. And I'm not saying that it won't sell, and I'm not saying that
Yeah.
they're not good, okay?
Right.
But in the long run, if you look down the line, you go, well, the mild guys who like Connecticut shade cigars, they're not going to smoke this not your grandfather's and really enjoy it because it's really not meant for them. And for the guys that like the stronger, more peppery, more zesty, whatever you want to call it, cigars, they're going to smoke and say, oh, yeah, this is really good for a shade cigar. Okay, they almost always say that, for a shade cigar. And then they don't typically become box buyers on it. They go back to their dark Cuban seed and their Maduro cigars. So I knew from jump that I wanted to make something that was your grandfather's Connecticut shade cigar, but I wanted it to
Right.
be the way I remembered it. I remembered it being mild, and I remember it being easygoing, but I also remember it
Mm-hmm.
being sweet, and I remember it being creamy, and I remember it being nutty. And the other thing too is I remember the smoke. The smoke wasn't thin. You know, all my cigars have
Mm-hmm.
very chewy, dense, heavy style smoke.
Yeah.
It's part of a signature of what I do. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I wanted. I wanted that. Do you remember those Dunhills that used to come in the tubes after they left
Yeah,
Cuba? Those were
exactly. Yeah.
fantastic. There was a brand called Butera that they used to make cigars that were, you know, just really just creamy and lush and dense, but they were still mild cigars. And there were a bunch of
Right.
other makers, including a lot of the mainstays,
Like
Legacy
a Jamaican
Cigars.
Macanudo, maybe, or something
Look,
like that.
Macanudo, I don't care what anybody says. Macanudos were really great cigars when I was smoking them back in the
Mm-hmm.
day. I'm not a good judge of how Macanudo is now because I haven't smoked enough of them. I'll leave that to consumers to decide.
Right.
But I just
Mm-hmm.
know that in my sampling of those brands, they just, I don't know, somewhere along the way, they just became almost shadows of what they
Mm.
originally were. And, you know, part of it, I think, too, is I think that consumer gets a little bit ignored in our market, which is kind of weird because half the cigars sold in America, by the way, are mild shade cigars.
Right.
Half of them. I mean, it's a big audience,
Yeah.
okay? They are the guys. And for most small makers, they don't get into that, even though it's the biggest, because it's also the one that's the most difficult to compete in because all the big
Uh-huh.
companies own the market. You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
have all the brands
Mm-hmm.
that cover that. And it's also something that you get absolutely zero blogger social media love for comparatively. Because look, if 50% of cigars smoked in America are mild shade cigars, then shouldn't 50% of the pictures online on Facebook and Instagram, shouldn't they be shade cigars roughly? But they're not. If you look,
Mm.
you for every 100 photos, you might see one photo of a shade cigar. So as a small company that's desperate to be noticed, and because social media is such a marketing tool, you
Mm.
know that when you make a shade cigar, you're not going to get a lot of social media love on that product. So for most people, they don't really focus on making those cigars. And I think that those consumers maybe have been a little bit short shifted by just the way the marketing trends go. And then when I smoke the current examples, well, I understand. I mean, I think they just kind of accept that this is the way a shade cigar is supposed to taste, and
Yeah.
that's the standard bearer. And I was like, no, I wanted to make a cigar that reminded me of the experience that I enjoyed when I was smoking shade cigars in my early years. You know, what's funny too is I thought when I made it, like I smoke everything all the time for quality control purposes, but I
Sure.
only smoke something like crazy when you're doing the development.
Yeah.
And then after the development's done, after that, it's pretty much okay for quality control. But for just general smoking, there's certain products that I make. I don't smoke a lot of them. Okay. I don't smoke a lot of Todos Los Dias half Churchills. I find it too spicy. I find it too biting. For me, it isn't something that when I'm in my humidor at home that I grab a lot of half Churchills. You know, I don't smoke like in the Sobremesa brand itself, the original one, Elegante,
Yeah.
short Churchills, Cervantes Finos. It's rare that I light up a standard El Americano Toro, even though it's the #1 seller in the brand, because
Yeah.
it isn't my size in that particular blend. You know, in that blend, I like these other 3 better. So when I finished with Brûlée, I kind of thought, okay, I'm done with Brûlée and I'm going to move on my merry way and go to the next thing. But I actually find myself choosing to smoke a Brûlée almost every single day as part of my rotation. And that's kind of surprising when you think about the fact that I'm kind of a mainline nicotine junkie. And so much,
You're Mr. Nicaragua.
so much of what I make is so robust, and I'm so synonymous with a certain style of cigar. But even I choose to consciously smoke this cigar, even when I don't have to.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I think I told you this when these first came out, and I had my first. This is like right in my wheelhouse. Like I think I said something on the order of this is like you made the cigar for me. You know, like if you know, I said, Steve, make me a cigar. This would have been it, because I like my more of. It's not that this is, well, I guess it borders on medium body, but I more like a medium body, very creamy, very sweet. It's just got everything I like in it. Like right now, I'm getting a very nice creamy, kind of a nutty, woody kind of character. It's got a great aroma. I mean, this is just, you know, if this is, like you were saying, if this is the kind of cigar you're looking for, you know, in terms of, you know, that kind of a flavor profile, then, you know, or that kind of cigar, then this is the cigar that you want to smoke, because it does have that kind of classic, you know.
And you know what's funny too? When I released it, knowing the way even knowing that the market is so big for this product, knowing that it's so highly competitive, and honestly, I kind of made it mostly because it was missing. Because I would be doing a cigar event, and the guy would come in and say, "Well, I like mild cigars," and then what I would do is I would take him to the humidor and show him 6 or 7 other companies' mild cigars.
Right.
I had nothing to really suggest to the guy. In Muestra de Saka, the Exclusivo, it's on the milder side because it's made of all tobaccos that are aged a minimum of 5 years, the entire cigar. And at this point, some of the tobaccos are 9 years old actually in that cigar. But I mean, for the most part, I don't really have something for that individual. So it was kind of one of those things where, okay, I kind of need this when I'm at an event. I really underestimated how popular this cigar was going to become. And what always happens is every brand sells new, hits a peak, then it stops selling as well because you have other new stuff. So consumers are trying all the other new stuff. And then what ends up happening is the brand will hit a valley. Well, most brands just continue to go down and then they discontinue them. 75%, 80% of the brands, they do literally 75% of their sales in that first 12-month period. That's what ends up happening. But then if it hits a valley, then it's a question of, does it stay in the valley and then does it slowly go down or does it start to go up? And that's the trend with everything on every single brand, universally. Sobremesa Brûlée has never stopped. I haven't hit the initial peak on it. And it's a full 12 months later. I'm up over 400% year to date on Sobremesa Brûlée, which is just mind numbing to me.
Well, I'm telling you, it's really that good. And I could smoke this every day. I mean, like I said, I'm not just, you know, kissing your tuchus. You know, I mean, this is one of the best things I think you've ever done. I'm talking about you. But you know, I noticed I was going through your brands on your website, and you know, you make, you know, for people who don't know, Steve is also responsible for, you know, Sin Compromiso, Muestra de Saka, the Umbagog, and of course, you know, the Mi Querida. But you don't do Lanceros, do you?
I have one in Muestra de Saka. I have the
You do?
Now
How did I
Leave
miss
Me the
that?
Hell Alone. may not be on the website. I rarely update that
Oh, okay.
website.
Yeah.
It's probably missing. It's
Okay.
been on my to-do list
Well,
for hours to improve that website, but I'm
uh-huh.
not a website designer. I take weeds and I roll them in a tube for a living. So
Well,
every time I touch it, it's like one more problem.
yeah.
Eventually I'll get to it. In fact, I've been
Yeah.
in conversations with somebody, and I think I'm just going to pay them to do the work and make it right. But yeah, I have a Lancero. I have a 7x38 in Muestra de Saka called
Okay. Thanks for the
the
correction. All right.
hashtag NLMTHA. Now leave me the hell alone, because
Good.
everyone always bugs me about making Lanceros, and so there, I made one. It's done, and oddly
Okay.
enough, that's turned out to be wildly popular too. So it's
Yeah.
very difficult for Lanceros to be commercially successful. As much noise as there is about them, they
Uh-huh.
really don't sell for all practical purposes. I can tell you, most companies struggle to sell 500 boxes. Even a really large company, very
Right.
rarely will they make a commitment beyond 1,000 boxes of any Lancero. And even mega companies won't even, they just won't touch 2,000 boxes. And then now leave me the hell alone. Just in the last 12 months, I've sold over 4,500 boxes of those Lanceros, which is just
Wow.
another mind-blowing thing to me.
But I want to talk to you about this whole sweet cap thing.
Mhm.
Okay. Because when I had my first Sobremesa Brûlée, I said, man, I didn't think it was sweet cap because I know you don't do that.
Well,
But I
first off,
said,
let's back up on that. I do. I mean, look, I was president of Drew Estate. I've made millions of sweet.
well, I'm talking about,
Right, but I'm saying no. I don't currently make a sweet cap cigar.
right.
But
So I said, man, this cigar is so sweet. I would swear it's sweet cap. And I was asking other people who smoked. I said, did you notice it was sweet? And they go, yeah, it's really sweet. So there was this whole thing, going on, online with the, is it sweet cap and it's not, or what is it? And you did a really clever thing last year. You did this thing called the Saka's Taste for Yourself sampler.
I'm actually doing that right now. That's about to drop in about probably the next couple of weeks. It's actually in transit from Nika now. So when this whole thing came up, like I'm a cigar geek at heart, so I ended up saying, okay, well, let's make some single sweet tips and let me make some double sweet tips of the Brûlée Toro, because I'm curious. Let's see what they taste like. And it was just one of those exercises, and I thought, okay. And since I kind of thought it was cool, I'm like, yeah, you know what? Why don't I make it available to retailers if they want to buy a 5-pack? And I did it kind of tongue in cheek. I called it the Saka Taste for Yourself sampler. Shut the fuck up, And and I really, and I really thought that it was going to, maybe I get a few retailers to play along. I ended up having to cut the sales off on it after just 7 days because it was stupid how many retailers were willing to go along with this thing. And look, it ain't cheap because it's Sobremesa Brûlée Toros in the pack. So it's they're like $12.45 a cigar for the ones. And the way it works is in the pack there are 5 cigars. They're banded with a letter S, T, F, or U, and then there's exclamation points on the 5th one.
Right.
And what I'm guaranteeing the purchaser is that at least one will be the regular Brûlée Toro, one will be the Brûlée Toro with a single sweet tip, one will be a Brûlée Toro with a double sweet tip, and then the other 2 I'm not saying. They could be regular, they could be single sweet, double sweet. Just gonna let people taste for themselves and debate it. And I'm really just stirring the pot. I mean, most makers, if you said that they were sweetening their cigars and they weren't, they would get all like butthurt about it, and they would clutch my pearls, how dare you, blah blah blah. Not me. I love the discussion. Look, I know the blend is sweet. I named the blend Brûlée for a reason. That didn't come out of nowhere. I always got the sweetness from it, and the fact that there's a discussion about it, well, that makes customers want to try it for themselves and make up their own mind. What I would say to most consumers is if you buy a box, I think what you will notice is that sweetness level is variable. You will find some of the
Yes,
cigars that are much sweeter.
I agree.
And you will find other ones that you can barely detect any of it at all. And if you were manufacturing it to be sweet, that wouldn't be the case. What would end up happening is that sweetness level would be, you know, like a box of Sweet Janes or a box of Cuba Cuba or, you know, Baccarat. It would be a very consistent level of sweetness. Where the sweetness is coming from in the blend is that it has to do with the wrapper, the Connecticut shade wrapper.
Yeah.
Connecticut shade wrapper is inherently a bitter wrapper. It always has a bitter back note to it. It's just a component of it. And in particular, Connecticut grown shade is a slightly bit more bitter than Ecuador grown shade. And it's one of the reasons, there's a myriad of reasons why we as manufacturers use the Ecuador over the Connecticut, but this is one of the reasons why. It has a less bitter nature. And this bitterness is something that actually dissipates over time, that if you bale age Connecticut shade tobacco, that bitterness essentially just kind of magically seeps away. The problem is most people don't give the wrapper much time because they don't have to. And what I mean by that is Connecticut shade tobacco isn't fermented in a polone or a bulk. It's never been done that way. Regardless of whatever pictures you've seen or what anyone's ever told you, they're just wrong and they're lying to you. What it is, they're not typically lying, they just don't know. The way Connecticut shade tobacco is fermented is it's mulled, M-U-L-L-E-D, mulled. And what mulling is it's a gentle process, well, in the case of Connecticut shade tobacco, is a gentle heating process where what we do is when we pull the tobacco from the barn, we end up putting it in normally cardboard cartons, typically somewhere around 100 to 120 pounds a carton. Some manufacturers 150, 130. And what ends up happening is we put it in a room and we keep it at 3 graduated temperatures along the way, 90 degrees, 110 degrees, and eventually at 130 degrees. And this process ferments Connecticut shade tobacco in 35 to 60 days. It just depends on the texture and the thickness of the primings. The very outside, 75 days is like the absolute max that it takes. At the end of pulling it out of the mull, this tobacco, it combusts. It tastes like it's supposed to taste, but it has a little bit of bitterness to it, but that's a common trait in the tobacco. It's ready to go. So this is a very short fermentation cycle compared to any of the wrappers we use, with the exception of Candela. Candela requires 0 fermentation. That's all handled in the barn with the propane burners. And so what ends up happening is most manufacturers, they're using Connecticut shade that's literally been harvested just that year. The cigars that you're getting in September often have wrappers on them that were literally green and in the field in January.
Wow.
And well, look, it saves a lot of money. And if Connecticut shade consumers are used to this is what they buy, then therefore this is what they want. What happens though is if you take that Connecticut shade tobacco and you bale it to age it, in about 6 months time, the color evens out better. You get a better looking wrapper. Not only does the color even out, but it also gives it a better sheen. It actually looks a little oilier given about 6 to 7 months of rest. But if you then extend that bale aging for a minimum of 2 years, and ideally for 3, that bitter note just slowly dissipates. So once you get to over the 3-year mark, what happens is it allows that inherent sweetness that's always been there. You get it because the bitter component is gone. And that's what you're getting when you smoke a brulee, is you're getting, this is the way Connecticut shade tobacco tastes if you allow it to bale age for an additional 3 years. But I'm not doing anything that any manufacturer couldn't choose to do.
I see.
They just don't for whatever reason. I don't know why. I mean, and there are some that do. So I don't want to just, completely, paint a brush like that. But that is really where the sweetness comes out of it. At the same time, I'm not going to fight with someone if they think I'm sweet tipping it. Fine, go ahead. Think I sweet tip it, and and I just did a training seminar for literally like 150 of our retailers, and I said, listen, if you want to tell the customer that, fine, just tell them my story too. and then just tell them you think I'm lying. I'm okay with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, and let them decide whether they like it or they don't like it. So the thing with the STFU packs, it's going to be interesting because I'm going to basically reveal which are which. I'm supposed to do it on September 15th. That's what the label says, but I'll probably delay it because I want to make sure the retailers have at least 30 days with the cigars before I do the reveal. So probably what will happen on September 15th, I'll go Facebook Live because that's what it says on the label. And I'll basically say, I'm not telling you today. I'm going to tell you on this new day. But look, they're in transit now. I just don't know how long it's going to take for them. Look, the logistics of things are crazy right now, courtesy C19. Yeah. So I need to get them in. I need them to get to clear customs. I need them to clear FDA inspection. And I need to turn them back around to our accounts. And once I turn the last ones around to our accounts, I'll then kind of start a 30-day clock. And then I'll do the reveal as to which. The one thing I wonder about, though, is if someone smokes all 5 at the same time, the double sweet is so sweet that it might ruin. I don't know if you can tell the difference once you put the double sweet in your mouth. You know what I mean? Well, the double sweet is really sick.
I might be able to. I got to tell you, I never really was a big fan of these sweet cap cigars because I don't like a lot of the sweetener that they use. Like even your old buddies over there at Drew Estate. I even told this to Jonathan. I said, I really like this one particular cigar or something, but I'd like it just as much or probably more. You don't really need the sweetener.
Let me say this. You say that. I'm not a smoker of sweet tip cigars, but the numbers are crazy. I mean, those sweet tip brands, look, they sell massively. So while I might choose not to smoke them and you might choose not to smoke them, there's a lot of people out there that choose to smoke them. So I just, that's one of the things. I'm not anti it. The only thing I'm anti is not telling the consumer what they're getting.
Right.
So, and I'm not even opposed to making an actual sweet tip version of Brûlée, but there's a couple problems with that. The first problem is it makes the branding message very confusing. That I'm saying here's a sweet tip one and here's a non-sweet tip one. Okay, and I've already got the controversy on Brûlée. So now what am I going to do? It's going to make it even worse. And then even a bigger question to me is someone going to smoke a $12.50 Connecticut shade cigar that's sweetened? I mean, they do all the time with Baccarat, right? They do all the time with Nat Sherman Host. These are very popular brands.
Yeah, I like the Host a lot, actually.
Right, they sell a lot. So there's a lot of consumers, but those cigars aren't ultra premium, $12 up kind of cigars. They are more, $5, $6. I don't even know how much they cost, but I think they're somewhere like between $5 and $7 a piece.
Yeah, I mean, like I think the Asylum Insidious is something like just a couple of bucks or $3, So
I don't know that there's a customer that's willing to pay for, Davidoff-esque quality with a sweet tip on it. You know what I mean? I have a hard time.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there, but
so I don't know.
I'll tell you.
I don't know if there's a market for it.
I don't know, but I am writing an article on sweet tip cigars that are not flavor infused actually right now because I haven't discoveries over the years that these are cigars that, all right, so you have some sweetness on the cap, but it's a little more, maybe subtle or that it's not, but the cigar's not flavored, so, but this has been fantastic. Every smoke, every puff, I should say, every puff has been consistent. I mean, it's just sweet, it's chewy, it's, nice and woody and nutty, and it's right down the line. I mean, as you've been talking, I've been really enjoying this, and it's just every puff is great. I mean, like I said, it's like just the kind of cigar I could smoke every single day. So, but I want to ask one more question about the sweetness, not about the tip, but are these wrappers, does it matter what priming the wrappers come from? I mean, the lower primings tend to be sweeter.
No, not really.
It's just the
thing is, I actually don't know the primings of the wrappers, because what ends up happening is you lose the priming information from the point that you pull the tobacco out of the barn and you go
Uh-huh.
to ferment it. Because once you go to ferment it, whether you're going to mull it or you're going to do it in a traditional bulk, what ends up happening at that point is you're pulling it in off the tobacco plant from the bottom up. So you know the primings as you're hanging them in the barn. You're keeping
Right.
track. First priming, second priming, seventh
Mhm.
priming, eighth priming. When you pull all that tobacco down from the barn, you then start sorting it for texture. And then ultimately, the texture of the tobacco tells you what it is. So the fact that this was a leaf that was primed on the third grow around, yeah, that tends to be a thinner leaf than a sixth priming. But if a sixth priming physically feels thinner, it's going to go with the lower primings. And if that third priming physically feels thicker, it's going to go with one of the heavier. And that's where we get into that whole, classifying everything as Seco, Viso, Ligero for texture. Because when we go to ferment it, it's important that the tobaccos be of the same texture and thickness so that they evenly ferment together. So like I said, the thinner textures in the malt, they only take 30, 35 days, where the heaviest of textures can take upwards of 60, maybe as many as 75 days. So that priming information really kind of becomes irrelevant. Now, as a general rule of thumb, I would say that most of the wrappers that you see on Brulee are coming from more towards the top end of the plant. I know that because of the texture, and I also know that because of the color, because the
Okay.
color of the wrapper on Sobremesa Brûlée is what we would classify as a BW, which stands for brown wrapper. There's
Oh, okay.
basically four, there are two grades of top end Connecticut shade. There's grade 1 and grade 2. But there is no quality difference at all between grade 1 and grade 2. They're exactly the same. The difference is that in grade 1, there's only two colors. It's what we call GW and it's what we call YW. GW for green wrapper, YW for yellow wrapper. And when I say green, I don't mean candela green. I mean
Yeah.
just this very slight hue. When you're looking at it in northerly sun, you can see the greenness in it. And those are the only two color classifications that go into grade 1. And then grade 2 are the ones that are LW, light wrapper, and BW, which is brown wrapper. Almost all the cigars that you see in Connecticut shade in the market are LWs or BWs, with a few exceptions. You remember Macanudo Gold?
Yeah, I was
Macanudo
going to
Gold,
mention that.
right?
Yeah.
Macanudo Gold is a really good example of a YW wrapper. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
got that real kind of yellow hair kind of
Yeah,
look
you're
to
right.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a YW wrapper, but almost everything is LW, BW. I choose, and taste wise, there's really no difference between the LW and the BW. The reason I choose the BW is because it's got enough thickness and color to it that it hides the binder underneath it. In the LW, when you put a dark binder underneath, sometimes it'll actually show through the wrapper and it'll actually make the wrapper look dirty, even though the wrapper is pristine.
Oh,
But the
interesting.
texture of it and the color of it will actually allow. So this has a San Andres Negro, a Maracapan binder underneath it. That's a darker tobacco. So if I laid the LW as the final wrapper on this, the cigars would end up looking kind of manchar and spotty, and it would look like the wrapper's discolored when it really isn't the wrapper being discolored. It's really the binder showing through that wrapper. So
How do you
I
like that?
tend to go with the BW because the BW takes that problem out of the equation.
Awesome. That's great. Look at this great ash on here. The reason I'm glad you brought up the Macanudo Gold, what I was referring to before was when they first came out, I think one of their claims to fame was that the reason why it was sweet was because they were using these low priming,
I didn't even know that was
wrappers.
the claim of theirs, to be honest.
Oh, I don't know.
Look, the marketing guys come up with all sorts of things to say. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Look, again, if they properly aged it out, it would be sweet. And it wouldn't surprise me that
They are
General
kind of sweet.
STG would properly age it out because in
Mhm.
their case, they have such inventories of Connecticut shade tobacco that I imagine for them it's pretty
Yeah.
commonplace to have bales that are pushing past 2 years on a lot of product, just
Sure.
a function of the scale. Same thing with a company like Davidoff. Davidoff has really well-aged Connecticut shade tobacco. They don't use it on all the products that are made in that factory. They reserve it for certain ones, but I mean, they definitely have that tobacco available to them.
Yeah.
Again, it's a function of scale and size.
Okay. Well, this one is, it's just burning another great ash on here. It's just burning great. You know what I wanted to ask you about too? I want to get back to what we were talking about when we first started about price. And I was saying that a couple of years ago.
Want to do blue first?
What's that?
Want to do Sobremesa Blue first?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I do want to talk about that because Sobremesa Blue is going to be coming out shortly, correct?
Yeah, we actually just started shipping it. In fact, I saw my first photo today online of it out in the wild. This one's actually blue right here.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. So.
Oh yes, I remember you showed a picture of the band online. Yeah, I love the color. It's like a Tiffany.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a hair lighter, but yeah, it's kind of that. I've been calling it robin egg blue, Frenchy blue. It's for me, the blue is actually pulled from the Vista, the Sobremesa Vista. So I guess it's Sobremesa blue, but
right. So tell us about that.
So one of my favorite sizes in the regular Sobremesa line is the Cervantes Fino. It's 6 1/4 by 46.
Yeah.
That size in the original blend just really works super, super well. And it happens to be, oddly enough, Sobremesa Cervantes Fino is the #1 Sobremesa seller outside of the US, the Cervantes Fino. It's the preferred size. In the US, it doesn't do all that great. It sells, but it's nowhere near close to, literally, there's like 5 other sizes that sell better than it, even though for me personally, it's my preference. I really like it. And
I like those dimensions too.
When I was making the Brulee blend, I liked this size the best too in the Brulee. I really did, but I didn't want to release it because I know that it doesn't really sell all that great. And look, you don't want retailers to have a bad initial experience with a cigar, because no offense to my friends out there in the retail world, they don't really care if the cigars are good or bad. What they care is, do they sell, for the most part. So it made much more sense for me to focus on, Toro, Robusto, Double Corona, those sizes. But I really liked this one. And the other thing too, when I was making Sobremesa Brûlée, I really wanted to use this blue ring. That's what I wanted to do from jump, but I was afraid to, because the cigars that have this color blue on them, they all fail. 100 years of history, not a single one has ever made the gauntlet. And if you don't believe me, just think about all the brands that have been in the marketplace for 20, 30 years. Tell me one that has this color ring on it. Not a single one.
Maybe it's a boy. I don't know.
Yeah, it's what I mean. So I know that the size isn't a big seller, even though I love it. I want to do the blue band, the Frenchy blue band, but I know that that's kind of like the kiss of death too. So I'm like, what am I going to do? So I decided back when we were making Brulee, saying, okay, you know what? I made a special tweaked version to make it work in the Cervantes. The blend is a little different. It's a little touch stronger. When I say a little, I mean a little. So in other words, if you don't like Brulee, you're not going to like Brulee Blue. It's not enough of a difference to make you say, but there's a slight difference, and I really like it, but I know it's going to be commercially a flop. So therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it as a limited production item. Because if you make something limited, there's always enough that you can sell 500 boxes, 1,000 boxes. You know what I mean? There's consumers that will smoke it. There's enough people out there that will really love that size. It doesn't matter that it's got the Frenchy blue band on it, because you're not thinking about it being a brand 20 years from now. And so I decided last May to make about 1,000 boxes worth of Brulee Blue, is what I decided to call it. And I decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to age them a full year, in the aging room, to make them even a little bit more special. That was my whole master plan.
Right.
And it worked out well, except here I am a year into the future, and Brûlée is literally selling 6 times more cigars than I thought it would sell.
That's fantastic.
It's off the chart. So the demand I have on Brûlée Blue, I should have made 4,000 boxes, 5,000 boxes of Brûlée Blues. But I didn't, because I was making the decision back in May before we even had sold the first Brûlée. And I thought that making 1,000 boxes was a big enough gamble already, because these cigars aren't free, you know, it's real money. And and as soon as I saw the way the Brûlée sales were going in July and August, I started making more blue. But I was a bit cautious. I was making about an extra 200 boxes a month. So basically, I have this first 1,000 boxes that have been aged a full year, and those are being shipped out now, nowhere near enough. Almost everyone that ordered them, we had to knock them down to like 5 boxes, which is ridiculous. And then basically starting in September, well, I'll then have more, because look, I'm in the business of cigars. You know, I want the cigars to be perfect. I want them to be great. I want them to be this. I want them to be that.
Sure.
But let's not kid anybody out there. I do this because it's my job. This is my business. This is how I pay my employees and support 100 families in Nicaragua. And so I have the materials to make more blue. I just didn't make them. So what'll end up happening is, starting in September, there'll be more, and there'll be more in October, and more in November. And as long as I can make them the same, I'm happy to make more of them. You know, I didn't intentionally mean to limit it this much. I just didn't anticipate the numbers that actually, because I don't, you don't want to make too much of anything, because then you end up having to sell it at deep discounts and you ruin the brand.
Yeah, I know.
But at the same time, I don't want to make too little either, that people who genuinely want to smoke it, they can't get it. You know what I mean? I don't want people, this is the other thing I'll say to everyone that listens to this. Everything that I make more of. The only thing that I intentionally limit production on is unicorns. And even with unicorns, I make more every single year. So there's really no reason to ever pay more than what is fair for my products. I see these brands that, you know, they're limited production, and some consumer will spend $100 a cigar, you know, $150 a cigar. Crazy price. I look at that all the time when I was at Drew, Liga Privada, Feral Flying Pigs. Customers were paying $150 for a Feral Flying Pig. I mean, the whole box of cigars were like $14 a cigar, $15 a cigar, and they were paying 6 times the market value for them. And what I'm saying to consumers is, don't do that. Just be a little patient. There'll be more that'll come. If you want to smoke Sobremesa Blue, you're going to have an opportunity to smoke Sobremesa Blue. Now, look, if you got the money and you don't care, go for it. If you're drinking with friends to get some Sobremesa Blue and you want to give them 3 cigars for 1 cigar, then fine. But don't pay this secondary market price for whatever these end up being, because if you just waited, you were going to be able to get them in October or November or December, you know, March of next year. Your life is not going to end because you don't smoke a Sobremesa Blue in the month of August. You know what I mean? It'll be fine. It'll be the same cigar. It'll have a full year of age on it. It'll be right.
Well, that, you know, that kind of brings us full circle to what we started to talk about at the very beginning, which is about cost. And like I was saying, you had spoken here a couple of years ago. You were doing an event and you were speaking about, you know, why your cigars cost what they cost. And you say, look, you know, I mean, you got to have quality ingredients, and I use quality ingredients, and you know, they cost more. So maybe you'd be better to explain it.
I mean, just put it in simple terms. I mean, why does ribeye and tenderloin and porterhouse cost more than sirloin? I mean, look, only certain materials hit the top tier grades. I mean, I all know we all say we use top tobaccos, but that's not true. We can't. There's no crop that produces all great tobacco. Crops produce all kinds of tobacco. And any tobacco, yeah, overall, this may be a particularly good crop versus a not so good crop, But even in a not so good crop, even if it's a disaster, there's still some cream that you can find in that crop. And when the crop's better, there's more cream. So
Right.
I tend to only work with materials that are the cream of these crops. It's what I like to make. It's what I like to do. It's what I currently like to smoke. And when you start getting into that, and then you start getting into me being so nudgy and such a dick about detail, well, that escalates the price too. So you're paying a lot for the materials, and then you're also adding additional costs. Like, for example, a mi querida, most cigars are weighed in 50 count wheels in quality control, right? Not mi queridas. Mi queridas, every single individual cigar is weighed at the bench by the bonchero before the wrapper ever gets put on it. They literally all have little gram drug scales sitting on the table, and they have to weigh it there. And if it doesn't fall within a criteria, give or take a gram either way, that cigar has to be destroyed right then and there. I don't want that cigar going into quality control, because the problem is when you weigh things in a 50 count wheel, there can be cigars that are 5 grams heavier and cigars that are 5 grams lighter, but they all average out. So the wheel ends up being within tolerance, even though there's 5 or 6 cigars in there that are underfilled, and there's 5 or 6 cigars in there that are dramatically overfilled. So, I mean, that's just an extra step. And by doing that extra step, a lot of cigars that would normally slip through, and cigars that would normally, you would end up making money on, they're ending up getting destroyed at the table. Well, the tobacco is gone. I can't recoup the tobacco. It just becomes chopped. So it's just these little things that we do that escalate the cost of the product. And as a result, my cigars typically end up costing significantly more. In fact, in both of the factories that I currently work in, my products are the most expensive products that they currently make. Except I think in Hoya, I think their Cinco de Cadas is in that price costing. They use those kind of standards on Cinco de Cadas. I think they use those kind of standards on the Hoya de Nicaragua Numero Uno. And look, do you need to use those kind of standards to make a perfectly good smokable cigar? You absolutely do not. You can make a nice smokable cigar for $7-8. What you can't do is you can't make a cigar out of all top shelf material with really high standards for really less than $10. It's just physically not possible.
That's what you were saying, yeah.
And that's just where we're at. Doesn't mean that you're not going to find a $7 cigar that you think is perfect and you absolutely love and you think it's better than a $22 cigar. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying to make a certain quality of product at a certain level, there's a certain amount of cost associated with it. And as a company, what we do is we take whatever the true manufacturing cost is to make it consistently. And when I say that, I don't mean in the moment of time, because at any given moment, cigars always cost different. So in any given month, even, you will see the price at the back level actually shift by as much as 10% because of the material costs. Hey, I bought this Connecticut broadleaf. I paid $33 a pound for it, but I ended up getting a yield out of that tobacco. Only about 40% of it was good wrapper. Well, the next one, I got 65% good wrapper. So that one ended up costing me less than the one before, or sometimes the leaf is slightly thicker, just a minor little change. But when you start looking at it across thousands of units, out of this current bulk, I ended up using about 28 pounds of tobacco to make 1,000 toros. But on this bulk, I needed about 32 to 33 pounds to make 1,000 cigars. So the price at the factory level is always shifting. There's no way that this is the price. So when I'm figuring out what it takes to make it consistently, I'm always looking at the higher end of the spectrum, because if you start saying you're not going to go with what the cost potentially can be, what ends up happening is you then end up having to make the product either less quality because you have a set in stone price point, or you have to basically decide that, I'm going to lose money doing this. And the truth is, nobody decides to lose money. So what ends up happening is the product quality just goes down, is what ends up happening. And so I figure out what it takes to make it consistently great. And then I add a fixed margin. And that fixed margin, I'll tell the public everything it's 40% gross margin. That's what it is across the board. Yeah,
Pretty
you
sweet.
know, if the 40% gross margin equals $13.03, I'll knock it to $12.95 to make it a better price point. You know what I mean? If it ends up being, $12.42, well, I'm going to bump it to $12.45. So I'll tweak it a little bit, but for the most part, across the board, the average is about a 40% gross margin. And what the 40% gross margin works out to at the end of the year, if I'm doing my job right, it works out to be somewhere around a 5% net margin is about what that actually ends up getting me. Because look, there's a lot of expenses. You got taxes.
Yeah.
And you got to run an office, and you got to run a warehouse, and you got to do customer service, and you got to do trade shows, and all these other things. But it works out to be about 5%. And one of the reasons why I went with this philosophy is because over the last 30 years, every company I've ever worked with or ran, we would always have this conversation of, oh, wow, we're selling an awful lot of X. I really wish we were selling more Y because we make more profit on Y than we make on X. So then you try to figure out how to market Y better. You'd spend a ton of money, advertising, events. You do all these things to try to make Y sell more because you make more money on Y. In the end, very rarely did that work. It works short term, but if customers like X better than they like Y, they buy X. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So by using the same formula for everything, it means ultimately I don't have a commercial dog in the fight. So look, Umbagogs cost what Umbagogs cost, and these Crioritas cost what they cost, and Sin Compromisos cost what they cost. And honestly, if Umbagog becomes my #1 selling brand, I make a net margin profit 5% on Umbagog. I make a profit margin of roughly 5% on Sin Compromiso at the end of the year. So to me, that way I don't actually have a fiscal dog in the fight. You know what I mean? It completely takes that out of the equation, so I don't have to. And you'll notice that, when I talk about brands, I don't, most companies, you'll notice they either favor what makes them the best money, or they'll favor whatever's new and fresh. And whatever they made before kind of gets ignored. But if you look at the way I talk about cigars, I pretty much talk about everything. I evenly distribute love to all of my children. Now, will all of my children be successful? No, they will not be. But I don't get to determine which one is successful and which one isn't successful. All I can do is prep them to go out in the world and to try to do good things. But in the end, they have to live or die on their own. And so that's the reason why I use that pricing strategy, because then it doesn't matter to me, which one is the winner and which one is the loser commercially.
Do you have what I would call a dark horse, like a cigar you wish that more people were aware of?
Yeah, no. Well, I don't know if I do or I don't. My worst selling product is Todos Los Dias.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's the dog from a commercial point of view. Look, it's kind of a niche-y blend. It's really super strong. There's a lot of nicotine, a lot of vitamin N in it. It's not meant for most consumers. But I may have missed the mark with the blend. I wanted something that was really strong in the portfolio. And that was what Todos Los Dias was intended to be. And when I was doing the blending, when I first went down the path on it, and I got to the end of the first blending, it was really just super spicy, super sharp, super biting, and it was really strong. And when I smoked it, I thought, you know what? It's a really good peppery cigar. But why buy it when you got Tatuaje in the market? You got Pepin Garcia cigars in the market. You got Lito Gomez's Double Lajeros in the market. I couldn't think in my head, why would I choose to smoke this over those? Was my first inclination. And I don't tend to like to do that. I try to make things that have their own lane and their own purpose. So I went back and I redid Todos Los Dias before it ever got released. So this is before it was for public consumption. And I made it this blend it's really a unique blend. It's got a real deep, dark, kind of figgy stone fruit kind of back note to it. It's got a really nice kind of dark cocoa to it. But the thing about it that's interesting is it has pepper, but it's a very sweet kind of chili pepper. And the sweet chili pepper, it hits the back of the palate. And then what it does is it's very smooth. So it's so smooth and it's got the sweet pepper. And what happens is the longer you smoke it, the more intense it becomes. It's kind of like stacking. It's kind of like when you eat a good curry or a mole. You know what I mean? Where the spice doesn't overwhelm you, but the more spoons you eat of it, the more it builds and it builds and it builds. And that's how Todos Los Dias is. So it's a really unique, interesting blend. But, you know, kind of going back to that not your grandfather's Connecticut, who's the consumer for that? The guy that really likes super strong, super nicotine, they tend to want to be punched in the face when they first light a cigar. They want those first few puffs, that first inch or two, to kind of slam them. And Todos Los Dias does not do that. So I think I may have made a blend. Look, when I say it doesn't sell, it's still up. It still grew 20% last year. But I mean, of all my brands, it's by far the slowest grower. And for most retailers, there are retailers, and the way it works is it's not like it's growing 20% across the board. What's happened is for certain shops and for certain consumers, they love it and it's selling really well to them. But for the vast majority, it doesn't sell at all. So it's very hit and miss depending on the individual retailer and their staff and the consumer. And that's the one thing I wish it got a little more love across the board, but maybe it doesn't deserve it. You know, it's a great cigar. It's a unique cigar, but ultimately, I don't know if it's going to be commercially successful. And I'm starting to see a bit of a shift in the market, and it's certainly not because of my generation. It's mostly the generation younger than us. The generation younger than us, they actually are a bit more discerning. They actually pay more attention. You know, they're very discriminating, and they are definitely believers in quality over quantity. And for me, that works out really well because
that's coming to this.
That's the place that I want to be. You know, I want to be in that market. So for me, it works out great. But it's just that trend I think is going to continue. And what I'm now starting to see, because look, the retailers are always behind the curve every time. I'm now seeing retailers start to better curate their offerings. Now, look, in the case of Famous, that doesn't count. Famous is meant to be the place that everybody has accessibility to everything. Okay, your business model is to provide all the options. And that's true with most of the big national accounts. And it's a product that they can do. But it's not something that a brick and mortar store that only has 600 facings worth of shelf space can do.
Right.
So what they need to do, if they only have so much limited space to display things, they need to start being more judgmental and actually curate what they put on their shelves and actually do the work of a tobacconist for the benefit of their customers and say, okay, let me find the best mild shade cigars. Well, you know what? These 3-4 products are the best mild shade cigars in the market, in my opinion. So these are good options. Let me find the best spicy pepper sticks that are in the market for those guys. Let me find the 4 or 5 best Connecticut broadleaf dark Maduro cigars for these guys. You know what I mean? And actually take a more proactive approach. But for so many years, they just slam whatever's new on the shelf and they live on whatever's new. Or they try to do what the big accounts do and they try to have everything under the sun in their humidor. And none of it ends up in the original boxes. It all just ends up in bins. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but everything we make is brown and round. It all looks the same. You know what I mean? There's no differentiation from that perspective. So when you just start throwing them into the bins, they don't end up having that appeal for someone to pull it out of the bin.
It makes them seem cheap too, you know. Like
it makes it cheap, and it makes everything equal when things aren't equal. You know, there's a wide range of product, and what ends up happening is, and what I don't understand about these retailers that don't properly merchandise their humidors is they just end up spending a lot of money for a lot of stock and a lot of inventory that really doesn't sell them more cigars, because the way you make money as a brick and mortar retailer is not having more cigars, okay, but actually by getting more people to come through your front door. Because everyone that comes through your front door is going to go to your humidor and they're going to buy cigars. So what you want to make sure is you want to make sure that you have the right cigars in the humidor that are going to make that customer happy.
Right.
Not that you're going to have A through Z.
Right.
Okay. A through Z, because they can't compete in that realm, because you guys are going to kick their ass all day on the A to Z equation. You have all the advantages, you know,
right.
And so for them to be in the A to Z game is ridiculous. And I'm starting to see brick and mortar retailers come to this realization, you know, because for the last 20 years, all they do is whine about the fact that the online guys are beating them up.
Yeah.
But, you know, if your proposition is price only, well, you're always going to lose that battle. I'm going to lose that battle against the big companies. I can't make cigars as inexpensively as STG. I can't make cigars as inexpensively as Altadis. I can't make cigars as inexpensively as a myriad of other companies. So I choose to not compete there because I can't. Where I can compete, I can make a cigar as good as anybody.
Sure.
I can make a cigar that's just as absolutely good as any manufacturer in the world. There I have a fair playing field. There I have a chance. That's what I tend to do as a manufacturer, is I play where I'm actually competitive. And luckily for me, it's been working out okay already. So we'll see what happens. Talk to you next month.
I think, getting back to your point about how the younger smokers are a little more hip to, like, what they're looking for, and they're a little more discerning about what they smoke. I think it might have to do really because, they kind of brought up on the internet in a way, and you're always searching for reviews. You're always looking, it's so fast to compare and find, reviews and other people's opinions on things. I think that's why they may be a little more discriminating. Would you agree with that? I don't know.
Absolutely. Look, I always tell the story. I'm in Phoenix and I want a street taco. I spend 45 minutes, researching street tacos. $1 tacos, $2 tacos. I spent 45 minutes between Yelp and TripAdvisor and this and that. I finally picked the taco place. And then I drive 40 minutes to get to this taco place. I'm in Phoenix. I easily passed 100 other places I could have bought a perfectly good street taco.
Exactly.
Okay? But I didn't, because I wanted to have these street tacos.
These two, right.
Right. And I think you see that across the board. You see it with restaurants, you see it with craft beer, you see it with small batch bourbons, you just see it with bourbon and whiskey across the board. And I think that this general trend really helps certain manufacturers, and it doesn't help other manufacturers, and then one of the things is you Google me and you can find my fat head in this black shirt, rambling endlessly about a myriad of topics. There's a lot of meat on that bone for you to pick through as a consumer, whereas pick some other maker, a big company, a lot of prices, you know what I mean? The same paragraph that is printed everywhere is printed here too, but there isn't actually a lot for the consumer to, dig their teeth into and, and hear about. I mean, even just a combination, talking about grade 1, grade 2, YW, GW, LW, BW. You interview a lot of people, Gary. How often do you get those kind of conversations?
We don't. That's why I have you on, because the whole idea is to educate the people that are watching this and get them into that kind of inside baseball a little bit.
And that works really well for that customer that wants to be educated. I always say that the people that smoke my cigars tend to be the best educated, most discerning consumers.
Yeah. And I think it's helped. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I think it's helped, all of this, what they call the boutique, smaller manufacturers like yourself, like Crown Heads, like, some of these other companies that just, working mainly through the internet, getting that word out there, having a brand, having an image. And I just think that, that's helped a lot. Like I'm down to the nub here, Steve. It's been absolutely fantastic. You just mentioned, whiskey, bourbon. What would you pair this cigar with? I'm having it with coffee, but which is great. But
I'm the wrong guy to ask about pairings. I smoke 10 cigars a day, so if I'm drinking it, I'm pairing it.
Okay.
I will say though, as a general rule of thumb, it's almost always to go with things that are a little sweeter. Things that are sweet tend to pair well with cigars. It's one of the reasons why bourbons pair good with cigars.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why port pairs well with cigars. Cognacs pair well with cigars. Even in Scotch, often a Speyside is a better fit than a lot of like the Islay Scotches. You start getting those really peat kind of bomb style Scotches. They become a more difficult pairing. But I mean, heck, one of my favorite pairings as a fat guy is Arby's, a Jamocha shake and a cigar. Man, I love a Jamocha shake and a cigar. That's like fantastic. I can't even drive by an Arby's without buying a Jamocha shake. Shout out for Arby's. I want my check. I think it's really comes down to the whole pairing thing. I think gets a little overblown. I think it's more about you finding the things that you enjoy, and sometimes the cigar doesn't have to be the star either.
No,
you can go the other way around where you're
true.
like, hey, I really want to enjoy this particular wine. Is a really tough pairing, but because of the tannins in wine. But I mean, some of the heavier reds, like the Pinot Noirs, the cabs, once they've been allowed to age out, they work well with cigars. But as a general rule of thumb, sweeter things tend to typically pair better with cigars. It's one of the reasons why I know there was a certain company, I don't know if they do it anymore, but if you ever go to a cigar event and they serve you chocolate with a cigar, don't buy a box. That. Don't buy a box because it doesn't taste the same without eating the chocolate. The chocolate just coats your palate with sweetness. It gives you the fat from the chocolate. Chocolate will make any cigar taste better, period. Doesn't matter what it is. Just any cigar. You got a box of cigars you got talked into buying from Famous that really are crap. The price is amazing on them. Don't throw them away. Just go buy some milk chocolate bars. Take a bite of the milk chocolate. It's going to make that cigar a hell of a lot better. You know what I mean?
That's true. I've done that myself.
Yeah.
But we're getting down to toward the end here, and I just have two more questions. First, about the box of Brûlée. Why 13?
13 is it's kind of weird. There's a multitude of reasons for 13. The first reason is because of where cigar prices have gone to, it makes a 25 count box really a big purchase for almost any consumer anymore.
Yeah.
So we have this general trend of box sizes shrinking. Now, I will tell you as a consumer, it costs you more because we have to take the cost of the box. It doesn't cost less to make a box that holds 10 cigars than it does to make a box that holds 25 cigars. It's the same exact cost for all purposes. So it makes the cost per cigar a little bit higher. But it also gives you the ability to buy an entire box of cigars because even like Sobremesa Brûlée Blue, they're very expensive. They're like $15, but a box is $150. You know what I mean? Whereas if it was in a 25 count box, we're now pushing up there and whatever, 350, 375 land. I don't even know. I'd have to do the math on it. So that's the number one reason why you see box sizes shrinking. So you got the box sizes shrinking. The problem when you're a young company is you want a certain amount of billboard effect on a shelf because you want to be seen. So by going with 13, it makes the box a little wider than a 10 count box. So you just get a little bit more of a peak of the brand. And then on top of that, 13 is a very reassuring look to a consumer because classically cigars came in 25 count boxes with 13 on the top, 12 underneath, one dummy cigar. So it also stays with that classic visual that as consumers you're used to seeing. It looks like a
Interesting.
box of cigars should look. In addition to that,
Wow. Hmm.
you always want to go with an odd number rather than an even number. And I'm giving education to all my competitors here, but they won't listen anyways. When you put an even number of something down on a table, it's never as attractive as an odd number. If you don't believe me, grab some
Really?
pens off your desk, put 2 pens down, then put 3 pens down and tell me which looks better. Put 4 pens down, then put 5 pens down and tell me which look better, the 4 pens or the 5 pens. Having an uneven number provides a central focus point in the layout that is just, for whatever reason, human nature, we just find it pleasing. So even though even numbers feel like they should be more pleasing, odd numbers actually are visually more pleasing than even numbers for almost everybody. I know there's some guy out there that's like, I don't care, but
Right.
I can't help you there. But as a general rule of thumb, and then the final thing that I would add to it is, for me, growing up, 13 was always a lucky number, not an unlucky number. In fact, as a kid, one of my very first fishing lures that I was successful using was made by Head. It's called a Lucky 13, and it's a popper. And so the Lucky 13 just always stuck in my head as Lucky 13. So there's a myriad of reasons that I use 13.
Okay. Well, they're all pretty valid. I'll tell you that. And speaking of fishing, how's the fishing going up
No
there?
clue, man. I'm in FDA hell right now. I haven't used my boat in the last 60 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know that. I'm just
All right.
yeah. All I do is clean the boat. I don't use the boat recently.
You got to clean the boat, I know. One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Do you think it's finally time to stop comparing cigars to the so-called Cuban standard? I mean, I think we've had enough of that, right?
I think that's kind of just happened naturally. I mean, look, that's the fault of the industry.
Okay.
For so many years, the industry was, you know, comparing itself to Cuban cigars.
Right.
Good as a Cuban, better than a Cuban, Cuban ass,
I do that all
Cuban
the
seed, Cuban this. I mean,
Yeah.
we put the word Havana on everything. We put the word Cuban on everything.
Mm.
And I mean, forever, that's what it was. And part of that's a byproduct of, the generation of makers that fled Cuba.
Right.
For them, they felt as though they had right and ownership to do so. But ultimately, I think it was a mistake. And what happened was Nicaragua, and this is where really Joya de Nicaragua, oddly enough, when they released that brand in 1999, the Antonio 1970, that was kind of a watershed moment in our industry. And, it was a Nicaraguan Puro. It was really strong. It was really full. And they didn't ever, from that point forward, we started talking about Nicaraguan cigars as Nicaraguan cigars, that they were their own entity, that there was their own reason for the consumer to want to smoke them, to choose to smoke them, and that we weren't trying to be Cuban. We weren't trying to make our cigars taste like their cigars. We weren't trying to make them look like their cigars. They make perfectly good Cuban cigars, and we make Nicaraguan cigars. And we kind of embraced that as an industry on the Nicaraguan side.
Yeah.
And seeing the success of what's happened, you now notice that the Dominican legacy makers, they don't tend to beat that Cuban band drum nearly like they used to beat it anymore. It's kind of gone the wayside. Every once in a while, you'll see the description a little bit Cuban-esque. Because look, some cigars are a little Cuban-esque. They do have something.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, look, some do. You know what I mean? But it isn't like the primary cornerstone of the marketing and the description. Right. And there's no way that you could ever confuse a Nicaraguan cigar for a Cuban cigar. They're worlds apart as far as flavor, profile, strengths, how they smoke, how they taste. So as an industry, we've gotten away from it. And the funny part about it is, where we as an industry 30 years ago, and even up to 20 years ago, everything we did was to mimic what they did at Habanos. You now have Habanos copying us they're making limited editions, and they're making regional releases, and they're making large ring gauge cigars. It used to be a 49 was the seven is right. So what was it? 7.25 by 49 is the double Corona, 7 by 49, 7.25. I can't remember the standard Vitola size on that.
7 by 49, I think it's Churchill, but yeah.
Right. No, that's 7 by 47, the Churchill. I know that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Julieta number 2 Vitola is 7 by 47. So I just, they're now making sizes copying us, and they need to, because the truth is we're kicking their asses. 20 plus years ago, 2% of the international market was non-Cuban, what everyone else in the world calls New World cigars.
Right.
We're up to 30% already. If it wasn't for the Asian market, Habanos would be in real trouble, because so many of their cigars are they're being bought all around the world.
Right.
They're all being exported back to the Asian market because they're on a total Cuban craze.
Yeah.
Okay, is where they're at. But in Europe, no, it's not happening.
Really?
South America, no, not happening.
Hmm.
Eastern Europe, no, not happening. We're knocking at the door. We're chipping away. I mean, my cigars, they're in Angola.
Oh, nice.
Sweden, Angola, Venezuela, Argentina. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Guam, Malaysia. I mean, that's craziness to me, to think that somebody in the Central African Republic is smoking a Mi Querida.
Yeah, that's got to be kind of cool.
It's cool, but look, in the end, look, the product has to live or die on its own, one way or the other. So
right.
I think once Nicaragua started embracing the fact of, we're just going to be proud of what we do and not compare ourselves to the Dominicans or the Cubans or the Hondurans, and you just kind of put that flag in the sand and you just say, hey, I'm here and this is what we do. That has really changed dramatically the way consumers perceive the product. And it's changed dramatically how other companies inside and outside of Nicaragua now brand their products and talk about their products, because you don't hear those conversations. And the other thing too is, even just 15 years ago, I would hear other makers be very anti-Cuban. It was a big part of their pitch. It was, oh, well, their cigars, the quality's this and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And it's, shit tobacco. And, I never went down that path, because look, I've smoked, give or take, about 7,000 Cuban cigars in my life. And that's nothing. I've smoked about 100,000 cigars, but there are some really great Cuban cigars.
There are, absolutely.
There's a lot of okay ones, and there's some really shitty ones too. And look, and sometimes, regretfully, some of the really great ones are shitty because they do have some consistency issues over the years. But I just don't think that talking bad about another product, it makes your product more appealing. And at the same time, I can see why a consumer might love Cuban cigars. Cuban cigars are milder. Very rarely do they go, most Cuban cigars on a 10-point scale, they're a 3 to a 5 strength-wise. They don't make a lot of really robust cigars.
Really?
And they have a more floral nature to them.
That's true.
There's a unique aroma. So I perfectly can understand why there would be a consumer that's like, okay, I love Cuban cigars. But I think when you just do across the board, everybody having equal access, you'll be surprised at how many consumers actually prefer the non-Habanos over the Habanos.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me, because I think, we have a lot, I mean, there's so much, even the technology has just been like amazing too. I mean, like the way,
it makes the world smaller
now and everything else.
There's a Nicaraguan only cigar store in Amsterdam. It outsells the Habanos store. I mean, you have the choice. You can go to the Habanos store. It's just a couple blocks down, maybe a little further than that. Or you can go to the Nicaraguan cigar store. And the Nicaraguan cigar store is doing great. And but I don't think it has to be a world of one or the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that there are places for the products to all coexist.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it is a limited market, I mean, so it's nice to have a nice chunk of it, whatever you can grab. Anyway, I wanted to thank Stephen Saka for coming on today, Mr. Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. And
Blowing up
you
your
learned a lot
interview?
today, Steve.
Blowing up your interview in the first 2 minutes?
No, that was great. No, I'm glad we talked about that because that's an important point. And I just love the brulee. I encourage everyone to buy it. It's just obviously it's selling well, so the word's out there. So definitely grab this. And remember that all Sobremesa and other Dumbarton Tobacco and Trust cigars are available at famous-smoke.com. And please sign up for their free catalog. There's some great deals on every page. And you will also find more cigar advice and information at cigaradvisor.com. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And if you like this video, hey, like it on YouTube and sign up for our subscriptions and notifications so you can follow us on our YouTube channel. And once again, I want to thank Steve for coming on and taking his time. And I hope everybody learned a lot today. I know I did. Anyway, thanks again for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Be good.